We are live. It's Dr. J in the house with Rob Edwards. Today, we're going to be talking about blood sugar spikes. How do they impact your testosterone? We'll be addressing this from a male and a female perspective today. This was a topic on my YouTube channel that was getting lots of traction. So I always try to look and see what's getting views, what you guys are commenting on. I try to take those videos and expand upon them each week. So the more you engage, the more I'm going to deliver with more content. Rob, how we doing, man? Welcome to the podcast again.
Yeah, great. We had a good time before, sort of just talking through what we were going to do today, and this kind of came up, and so let's rock and roll this morning.
Yeah, and let me know if you guys like some of the content we put on screen. We try to do it, one, it just keeps us on topic because these are kind of really heady topics. And also, hopefully, some of the images and some of the flows kind of help these topics, make it more easier for you guys to digest, pun intended. All right, so let's dive in. So insulin resistance and testosterone production. So insulin resistance is the hallmark of almost all hormone destruction. So when we're talking about from a female hormone perspective, high levels of insulin or reactive hypoglycemia or surges of insulin can impact the female hormones and actually cause more testosterone. And that's not good. It does it via 1720 lyase enzyme that increases androgens. And those chronic androgens can cause female cysts in the ovaries to form and drive PCOS. And it can also increase prolactin. And prolactin can throw off the female cycle, and it can also deplete the dopamine. And dopamine can also cause more mood issues, more focus issues, and more cravings. And so then the cravings kind of perpetuate bad food choices, and then the cycle continues. So that's, in a nutshell, looking at the female hormone side. And in the male side, these are the cells of Leydig. This is what your testicles look like in the inside. And this is where testosterone is produced, okay? You have the Sertoli cells, which is where sperm's produced, and then you have the cells of Leydig is where the testosterone is produced. A lot of mitochondria in the cells of Leydig, right? So any toxin that impacts the mitochondria is going to impact testosterone. Just keep that in the back of your head. But insulin resistance in men is going to impact the enzyme called aromatase. And aromatase causes more T, testosterone, to go to E. So for easy abbreviation, we'll just say T to E, testosterone to estrogen. So you have more T to E. And so we'll talk about all the things that can drive insulin resistance and simple things that you can do to address it. But these are the hallmarks, and we can talk about some testing and what we look at clinically. Go ahead, Rob.
Absolutely. I think both men and women, they have, of course, we have the opposing things happening with both men and women when the insulin resistance is happening. And I think some of the things that you'll hear from sort of the male clients, some of the things we hear from male clients is sort of lost my drive. I can't lose belly fat. My energy is sleep issues. My workouts aren't working anymore. And from the women's side, maybe they're having more of that PCOS symptoms, or they're having facial hair or acne or weight gain. Irregular cycles. So those are the kind of things that you'd be looking for in that kind of a situation, for us to kind of sort of put together those pieces of the puzzle.
Correct. Now, simple, like endocrinology 101, you have your brain. In the brain, you have the hypothalamus, and that's going to make gonadotropic releasing hormone. And then gonadotropic releasing hormone, they have it LHRH, but it's gonadotropic releasing hormone. I think LHRH is a type of gonadotropic releasing hormone. That then goes to the pituitary, and then the pituitary then makes LH and FSH. And these talk to either the testicles. FSH is going to talk to the testicles to make sperm. LH is going to talk to the testicles, the cells of Leydig up here, to make testosterone. Now, in women, we're going to hit it from both sides. Now, this is the female version here. LH is going to talk to the ovaries to make progesterone. And FSH is going to mature the follicle in the ovaries to then produce estradiol. And so both are important for healthy cycling, healthy physiology. When we have chronic stress, it's going to impact adequate levels of progesterone. Progesterone is really important for relaxation, for sleep, for rest, for recovery. Hormones are a major buffer for stress. So as your hormones get more depleted, like my wife had a friend who's perimenopausal and has a really hard time sleeping. And I'm like, hey, I guarantee you just that ovary function, the ovarian output of progesterone is probably dropping. They should probably look at going on some progesterone and supporting that. And then a month later, they tried that and their sleep and relaxation had improved markedly. Now, we have to always get to the reason why. If progesterone can be gasoline on the fire if you don't actually fix it. Now, in a perimenopausal situation, part of that is just the going into perimenopause, and the function of the ovary is becoming just depleted because that follicle reserve is dropping. So some of it is just physiology coming to an endpoint, right? In
Mhm.
menopausal kind of time frame. But with insulin resistance, it's a little bit different because now when we start to have more testosterone, that starts to throw off and grow follicles in women. I'm sorry, cyst in women, and those cysts start to impact prolactin. So how does insulin work, right? So here's insulin right here. It binds to the receptor site, and that opens up this glucose channel and it allows the glucose here on the right side to flow into the cell, and the body can start to burn that glucose over time. Now, what starts to happen is if we're not burning it, or this cell is already full of glycogen, right, which is stored
Mhm.
glucose. This could be in the liver or the muscle. Then these glucose molecules start to get stored as fat. So the healthier we are metabolically with healthy muscle or activity, these glucose molecules don't get stored as fat. They're always in the cupboard, ready to go. It's like putting food in the fridge, right?
Yeah.
We put food in the fridge, we're going to use it in a few days. If we go from the fridge to our pantry or to storage, it probably won't get used for a while. So we want to keep the glucose in our metabolic fridge, so to speak, so it gets burnt
Mhm.
up. Because once it goes in the pantry, it's always a little bit harder to take it out. And it's always a little bit more energy intensive to take this glucose that's now fat, to pull it back out, mobilize it, and now burn it up. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I think so, just from a simple energy use. Yeah, I mean, glucose, insulin, glucose affects the mitochondria, the Krebs cycle. Of course, it gives us the energy that we need. The primary thing that it's doing is giving us initial energy, right now energy. So glucose
Correct.
uh, produces energy inside of the body, and then when we have an overage amount of that, it's going to be stored as fat because the body can't use it. Right, and that's the issue with becoming also sedentary, or kind of the dietary choices that we're making. Some of the lifestyle things go into this picture, which creates this issue of insulin resistance, or insulin not getting inside of the cell properly. So glucose isn't getting inside the cell as well. If it's not, then we're going to be storing things as fat.
Would you mind going over that flow chart below? Under number 4. Do you see that?
Yeah, and number 4. So you're talking about the repeated glucose
Yes.
blood sugar spikes. Yeah. So
Yes.
when we have sort of these repeated blood sugar spikes, I mean, we're not just sort of level, but we're kind of going up and down,
Yes.
right? So we're having high blood sugar. Then what happens is insulin has to come back in to lower that, right? And so it's this chronic kind of up and down swing, which is going to cause more inflammation, is going to cause more cellular stress inside of the body. Then that high insulin it reduces the Leydig cells responsiveness in the testes, right? But it'll do that with all of your cells. But in this case, we're talking about in the testes. That cholesterol conversion into testosterone will slow down, right? So we're going to have a slow down process in terms of the cholesterol
Wait, I
converting.
thought cholesterol was bad, Rob.
Well, yeah. Well, so that's that's the prevailing thing, right? Cholesterol is the basis of all of your sex hormones. Many of your hormones require that. And so whenever we look at some of the connections, even in terms of, like, let's say Alzheimer's and things of that nature, right? It's kind of this where when people go on statins, for example, we're eliminating, or we're trying to reduce cholesterol inside the body. But the side effect of doing that is cholesterol is utilized to make all of these hormones, right? All of your sex hormones, all of these things that your body needs to be able to create that cascade of communication within the body. So cholesterol in and of itself has become this big monster, but it's a response to inflammation inside of the body. Just like if you get a cut on your finger or something like that, cholesterol is going to come in to patch that up. It's going to come in to start to heal those modes. So if you have damaged arteries, you have damaged cells or tissues in your body, you're going to start to see some of the same kind of response. But overall, that cholesterol conversion, it is going to slow down, and the conversion into testosterone is going to slow down. Sorry, that's going to affect our testosterone, and then over time, we're going to see a drop in our total and free cholesterols, and we're going to start to see, hopefully we can over time increase or change the reality here, which is by improving insulin sensitivity and restoring hormonal signaling. Often that's kind of our root cause of what we go after in this kind of situation.
Yeah, it's really important out of the gate that you have healthy cholesterol levels. You're eating healthy animal protein, healthy cholesterol, because cholesterol is primarily found in animal protein and in healthy animal fats, because that's the raw material building block. So we always want to make sure we have the raw material. Most of our hormones are cholesterol based, especially our steroid ones. There are some that are more peptide based. I'm pretty sure thyroid is more peptide based, growth hormone and insulin, they're more peptide. They're made from amino acids, where our sex hormones, usually from the throat down, are going to be more steroid based. So think testicles, think ovaries, think those type of hormones are usually going to be cholesterol based. So very important. We want good, healthy raw material. And secondly, oxidized cholesterol and inflammatory fats are usually what causes the problem. So fats that are not saturated, you're more of our seed oils and our processed oils, they're more damaged, they're more oxidized. It's the oxidized cholesterols, it's the small dense LDL from bad fats, and it's going to be our inflammation. So we always want to look at things like HSCRP, highly sensitive C-reactive protein, homocysteine. We always want to look at fasting insulin, especially in this type of video today. What should your fasting insulin levels be? They should be under 10, ideally under 7. These are key things to look at. That tells us we're not over secreting insulin. Next, we want to look at our, very important, we want to look at a functional glucose tolerance. So we get a blood sugar meter like this. I harp on this because this allows people to customize their diet. We get a blood sugar meter. I like the Keto Mojo. It Bluetooth connects to your phone, so then you can map it out and see. But we want to test our fasting glucose, right? Finger prick right on the side of my pinky. Done. I get my fasting. So I haven't eaten maybe all day, or I haven't eaten for 4 or 5 hours. I get my fasting reading. I want it to be below 100. 1 hour later, I test it again. Ideally, I want it to be below 120. Okay. Below 120 is ideal. And then 2 hours later, I want it below 100. Definitely 3 hours later. Some people are like, oh, well, you should go and get a glucose tolerance test from the blood lab. Well, the difference is those type of tests are going to give you a bunch of sugar, right? We're not doing that in real life. It doesn't really apply to real life. And so what normally happens is a domino rally. Blood sugar goes up, the beta cells produce insulin to knock it down. And so if we can get a pretty good window where our blood sugar is, then we kind of know where our insulin is to meet it. So the more blood sugar we surge, the more insulin we have to bring it down. And so what happens over time is with insulin resistance, blood sugar surges and the insulin has a hard time bringing it down. And so it has to make more and more and more, and it can't quite bring it down. And so over time, we see this snapshot down below where if it's above 110 or 126 over a 12 to 14 hour period, we say that's diabetes, right? But we can also get a glimpse in that first hour or 2 or 3, are we starting to become less sensitive? And so this is important because this can save us 5 or 10 years on that kind of diagnosis, because it could take a very long time for 12 to 14 hours later, which is what your fasting glucose test is showing, that there's problems here. And plus, we're actually using our food, our meal, so it correlates with our everyday life because we're using what we eat versus some sugary drink in a lab that doesn't really connect to it. Unless you're having that kind of soda or oranges every morning, then maybe it correlates, but most people aren't doing that. And so it just gives you a better window into what's happening into your life. So fasting below 100, 1 hour later below 120, 2 to 3 hours later back below 100, gives you a pretty good window of the insulin surge on the backside of it.
Yeah, I think that's well said. So I think things have to be functional, which is kind of, I think what you're pointing out is like, it's one thing if you're doing a 24-hour fast, and then you go in and get your blood glucose levels versus real-time information, what your real life looks like, what you're really eating. And what I noticed with a lot of the clients that I'm working with as well, it increases their compliance, through the roof, because they're seeing it real time. They can see, oh, when I eat this, it actually does that. Or whenever I eat that, it actually does this. And I think that's really what we're trying to figure out is what's going inside the body. And then, the other thing too is when we have high glucose in the blood, insulin comes in, that draws everything out, right? And then sometimes that's going to cause a cortisol reaction to try to get more glucose to balance that back out again through the liver. So it becomes this kind of cycle where, you're kind of chronically reducing, reintroducing glucose inside of the body. Cortisol, of course, long-term chronically will cause inflammation inside of the body as well.
100%. And so also if you're using a CGM, CGMs can be off by 15 to 20%. And usually it's behind by about 10 to 20 minutes. So I always tend to recommend a blood sugar finger prick test because it's going to be just a little bit more accurate. The Dexcom can be 10 to 20% off, and it's going to be a little faster. So you get a more rapid window because that first hour or 2 matters the most. And if you're off by 20 minutes and or the lab numbers off as well, up or down, then you may not get the most accurate marker. Because if let's say you're at 110 or you're 100, well, one's abnormal, one's normal, right? So it could throw you off enough where you may not get the best data. So if you have a CGM, that's great. It's good for people that have chronic blood sugar issues, type 1 diabetics, where there's always a blood sugar demand problem, and you need to have data all the time. People just don't want to prick their finger that much. But if you're just doing it a couple times a week, then I think you're pretty good to use one of these glucometers, if you will.
Yeah,
right,
and
so
just so
go ahead.
Just so the audience know, that's a continuous glucose monitor that we're talking about. The ones that you
Yeah,
put
so
on
like
your arm.
Freestyle Libre 3, Dexcom, those are the ones that go on the back of your tricep there. That's measuring interstitial fluid where the blood permeates into the fluid, but it's a little bit more delayed and can be a little off. And so this is looking at direct finger prick side of the pinky, and it's getting a direct window into the blood.
Yeah. Yeah. That's more of a slower down, like a slow down metabolic process to be
And
able
it's
to
not
see that.
bad, but it's just not going to be
So be as
optimal for what
accurate.
we're doing. Yep.
Absolutely.
And so a couple other things here. So free testosterone, only about 2% of your testosterone is free. So when we look at T, we want to look at free and total T. That's important. There's some X factors because there's a thing called sex hormone binding globulin, SHGB, and that can be influenced by albumin and globulin. And so you have to factor that in because things like insulin resistance in women can actually lower the amount of SHGB. So SHGB is binding up testosterone. So there may not necessarily be a big increase, but you may lower this SHGB to the point where you're increasing your free T. That's more in women. Now, in men, it's the opposite. When we have more estrogen coming in, that can actually increase SHGB. And there's things that like boron or stinging nettle that we can use. And also just getting estrogen down via
Mhm.
plastics, pesticides, glyphosate. Make
Yeah.
sure your water bottles are a surgical grade stainless steel, like a Yeti or a Hydro Flask, one that has a surgical grade stainless steel. Make sure you're not doing plastics. Even like some of the cans are all lined with BPA. So, do like if you're gonna do like glass, my Topo Chicos at work, I'm doing glass, right?
Yeah.
Or I'm using my Yeti, which is surgical grade stainless steel, for my coffee, right? Which can be a little bit acidic that could pull minerals off the metal. So make sure it's surgical grade. Yeti and Hydro Flask do it. Other companies do it as well. But when we start to have too much environmental toxins and estrogens, this GnRH can drop, which then can lower our LH as a man, which can decrease our T, and with women as well. So if we're adding more estrogen to the equation, it can throw off our LH and FSH, and they can start to skew estrogen dominance, and this LH in females can drop, and now we have lower progesterone. So this is kind of this
Mhm.
estrogen dominant cascade as well. And also for guys trying to get pregnant, this FSH can drop, and now what do we have? Lower sperm, less sperm counts. And we know there's an issue over the last 100 years. Sperm counts have gone from 50 to 100 million per 1 milliliter of sperm to like 20 million. So it's a ridiculous drop, right? This is why we see infertility rates so high.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if that has to do with sort of course, it's our exposure, our environmental exposures, but also sort of the inactivity, of men or the kind of demand that's there.
Yeah, and the other thing is cortisol spikes can impact testosterone too, partly because cortisol, it can increase glucose production. So a big
Mm.
spike of cortisol because you're stressed can literally mobilize a Snickers bar worth of sugar. About 25, 30 grams can be released based on stress. And one, cortisol can compete with testosterone, but it's also increasing this aromatase enzyme, causing more T to go to E, and with women as well, that high spike of cortisol, guess what it also does to their progesterone? It drops progesterone. And the more progesterone you have, the less progesterone you have, the more estrogen dominance skews. And the
Mm.
less progesterone you have, the more increased chance of PMS, right? The week before your period, breast tenderness, cramping, moody issues. And then you're also greater likelihood that you're not going to sleep well, have more cravings. And then when you have more cravings, what do? You eat poorly. And then what does that do? It perpetuates this whole cycle.
Cycle.
It like doesn't stop, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's just a cycle. It's a metabolic cycle. It starts. It's kind of what at that point it's not so much what is it, the chicken or the egg. It's kind of both. Getting into that cycle where we're just chronically having those habitual eating patterns or habitual sort of trying to suffice us. And I think a couple other things, the estrogen dominance, a lot of growths can happen during that time as well,
Hmm.
for both women and men. And the men, of course, having sort of the man boobs, right? That they
Yep.
can get as well. So those
I
some of
know.
the symptoms. Yeah,
Yeah.
gynecomastia. Yep.
Yeah. And also with women too, when we have high levels of insulin, you can go into Google Scholar or PubMed or just go to ChatGPT, type in hyperinsulinism and any type of tumor, right, or cancer. You're going to see there's a direct correlation with insulin and potentially even estrogen feeding cell growth. And when cell growth becomes out of control, what happens? That's essentially cancer, right? When your immune system cannot do program apoptosis, which is program cell death, cells overaccumulate and then they can take over the body, which is essentially what cancer is. And so the more we decrease the hormonal signaling, cells don't overly grow. I mean, we can have fibroids that both our wives have had in the past. So we know about fibroids, which is the most common benign tumor in women. We can have things like ovarian cyst. We can have all kinds of things like skin tag. We can have all kinds of other skin issues as well. Acanthosis nigricans, where you can see it on a lot of people in the neck or the skin folds. You get this hyperpigmentation shadow around the skin, axillary area. That's all pigment overly growing because of insulin. And so these are all important things to think about. And especially with guys too, you get the man boobs, right? And that's the gynecomastia. That's the excess breast tissue in men. And the problem is the more fat you have, fat also becomes this exocrine cell where it can also produce its own estrogen too. So it's like once these things start rolling, there's this inertia, this domino effect, this snowball effect where these problems get worse because now the fat is producing inflammation. Now the fat is producing estrogen, and the estrogen is producing more fat, and the fat's producing more estrogen. So it's this vicious cycle. We have to just kind of come in and just say, no, stop.
Yeah, it's sort of an overage, right? Sort of, it's an excess amount of what we need. I think sometimes with the glucose things getting out of control. I mean, when we look at, I think I was reading an article not long ago, and I think what we used to eat, like back in the 1600s, is when the simple sugars came out, and I think back then it was something like we ate maybe 3 or 4 pounds of sugar per year, and now we're eating somewhere closer to the average, eating somewhere between 80 to 90 pounds per year. And so it's an overage issue, and the body's going to try to figure out ways to deal with that. And that's where we start to get some of these metabolic chaoses happening because our body's trying to figure out what to do, with all this overage that we give it. And then add on top of that nutrient deficiencies, meaning we're just not having good, healthy diets. So usually people that are eating excess glucose or carbs or those kind of things also aren't adding in whole food carbs, whole food proteins, whole food fats. I mean, their diets are usually kind of skewed towards glucose, and this becomes that vicious cycle, which affects pretty much every single cell in your body.
Exactly. And also, fructose and glucose are handled differently, but I think this is a good spot to put a pin in it. And I think we do a part 2 on this topic next week. So we'll be back next Wednesday, guys, and we'll go part 2. We'll go into more of this a little bit deeper. And again, we're trying to talk about clinical things that you can do. So we've got to work on getting our blood sugar more stable, getting our inflammation down. And again, getting tested is a great place to start because if you think you have an issue, we kind of already talked about some of the things we can look at regarding fasting insulin. We can look at our functional glucose tolerance. We can run a free and total testosterone. We can also look at SHGB. We can look at estradiol. So we can test these things. So if you guys need support, I'll put a link for Rob down in the description. Rob at www.heritagehealth.life, L-I-F-E, link down below, and myself, justinhealth.com. We see patients worldwide. So if you want to dive in deeper, we're happy to run the tests, kind of dive in, work on all the best practices that we use with patients for years to reverse these things. Rob, anything else you want to leave listeners with?
No, that's it. I think we're ready for part 2. So we can wrap it up.
Week.
Yeah.
We got part 2. We'll come back. We'll come back on it. Awesome, guys. All right. Anything else, Rob?
That's it. Everybody have a good
you guys
day.
have an awesome day. All right. Take care.